The French are famous for bringing a certain style to everyday life. In the early part of this century, a certain Frenchman made a name for himself by bringing unique styling and advanced technology to the cars his company built. On this very risky proposition, André Citroën bet his entire company, repeatedly leading the stockholders, creditors, and customers of Citroën to wonder, is this any way to run a car company? A white wedge shape cuts along the pavement. Its profile suggests a modern sports car like a Ferrari, a Corvette, perhaps a Honda NSX. But in fact, it's a sedan whose line came to market many years before aerodynamic styling became popular. This car, and a matching vehicle speeding from the opposite direction, offer some features only now, 25 years after their introduction, becoming commonly available in production automobiles. These two cars sport a lineage which has become synonymous with all things French. And these white wedges, powered by Maserati engines, supported by a high-tech hydraulic suspension system, represent the pinnacle of achievement for their manufacturer. The nameplate behind the driver's door reads Citroën SM. These two SMs are speeding towards a rendezvous. John Chassin and Bill Green are friends who love their SMs and know that mutual support is the only way to keep them running. After all, Citroën has no American sales or service operation and hasn't made the SM for more than 20 years. John and Bill get together periodically to swap stories, trade tips, and share their appreciation for the consummation of a Citroën tradition. They both know that the SM didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the product of a long heritage of sometimes radical innovations in technology and styling, and the guts to risk putting those design advances into production automobiles. That tradition began with the company's founder, André Citroën. In 1913, this Frenchman of Dutch-Jewish extraction founded the Citroën Gear Company in Paris. The company made large gears with a unique chevron facing that allowed them to function smoothly and very quietly. A stylized form of the chevron design became the company's trademark and remains so to this day. With the outbreak of World War I, Reserve Captain André Citroën returned to military service. At the front, he found that France was suffering a dire shortage of artillery ammunition, a problem the 36-year-old industrialist immediately decided to solve. With government backing, Citroën bought land on the south bank of the River Seine, in the suburbs of Paris, a spot called Quai de Javel.
It was there that André Citroën, Monsieur Citroën as they put it then, became the owner of a 12-hectare site, and there that he built the first plant.
Citroën planned to manufacture artillery shells efficiently, using American mass production methods. And soon he was making 50,000 shells a day. Citroën's modern factory also included the latest in social support services for the largely female workforce. A company store, medical and dental clinics, childcare, and schools. When the war ended in 1918, André Citroën had a modern factory on his hands and no market for his artillery shells. He needed to make something else and decided to roll the dice on the young but highly competitive field of car building. Citroën must have been impressed by the usefulness of motor transport during the war. The governor of Paris had commandeered the taxis of the city to transport his reserves to the front. Their attack on the German flank during the Battle of the Marne, halted the Kaiser's forces before they took Paris. Citroen's automotive ambitions were also inspired by Henry Ford, whom he'd met before the war while helping the Mors Motor Company streamline its production methods. Ford's assembly line system for making the Model T fitted closely with Citroen's ideas about efficient production and mass-market sales. And like the Model T, the Citroen company's first car was straightforward and simple. Introduced in 1919, the Type A was Europe's first mass-produced automobile. At half the price of the competition, it was also the first inexpensive French car to be sold as standard with basic accessories, spare tire, bonnet, and with an electric starter and lights. Its 1.3-litre four-cylinder engine could maintain a respectable 40 miles an hour and got excellent gas mileage, 38 miles to the gallon. Citroën produced coupe and torpedo body versions of the Type A and a light truck that carried a 650-pound payload on the same chassis. Two years later, Citroën replaced the Type A with a more powerful B2.
This is a B2 which came out in 1921. The spare wheel is in back, whereas previously it had been on the side. The bonnet slopes down more steeply and has ventilation louvers on the sides.
The B2 also had a larger engine than the Type A, which gave it a top speed of 45 miles an hour. It was later equipped with this saloon body. The speed and reliability of the B2 made it a favorite among physicians and earned it the nickname Coupé Docteur. The B2 was also the basis for Europe's first sports car developed from a production model. The Caddy was a lighter, more powerful version of the B2. It had the same 1.4-litre engine block as the base model, but the light alloy pistons gave it more power and a top speed of 56 miles an hour. In 1922, Citroën announced a new, smaller car, the 5CV, CV for chevaux, meaning horses, and a reference to the taxable portion of the car's horsepower. Offered in two-seat and later three-seat cloverleaf configurations, most 5CVs were painted yellow, which soon gave rise to the nickname Petit Citron, the Little Lemon. With a tiny 850cc engine, the 5CV was not exactly a powerhouse. It was capable only of 36 miles an hour, and once it was going, it proved difficult to stop. But the Petit Citron was so reliable and economical that it sold like lemonade, particularly amongst women, making it Europe's first car for Madame.
When he stated that he intended to build 100 cars a day, many detractors said it was impossible. By 1924, he was making 300. 300 a day.
The sharply climbing popularity of Citroën's cars was due to André Citroën's genius for marketing, as much as the quality of the cars themselves. The company pioneered discount and credit sales. Repayment plans extending over 12 to 18 months helped to spread motor mania across France. André Citroën also became an adept exponent of the publicity stunt. In 1922, a group of 5 half-track B2s became the first cars to cross the Sahara Desert. Over the next 10 years, there were 2 more transcontinental crossings using Citroën half-tracks. Croisière Noire, or Black Cruise, in the mid-1920s, traversed Africa from north to south. 16 men and 8 Citroën half-tracks struggled for 6 months to cross more than 12,000 miles of Central Africa. Citroën later mounted an even more hazardous expedition, the Yellow Cruise across Asia in the early 30s. 40 men and 14 half-tracks trekked from Beirut over the Himalayas, across the Gobi Desert, and through China in the middle of a revolution. The success of the 7,400-mile journey helped cement Citroen's reputation for making cars that were rugged and reliable, as well as technically sophisticated. Citroën worked hard to keep his name always in the mind of the French car-buying public. At the opening of the 1922 Paris Motor Show, Citroën had his name sky-written 3 miles long over the city. And he contributed more than 150,000 road signs mounted all over the country, each bearing his name. But perhaps his most famous billboard was the Eiffel Tower. 250,000 electric light bulbs illuminated the Citroën name in letters 30 yards high for 9 years, starting in 1925. The aviator Charles Lindbergh used the gigantic sign as the final landmark on his famed 1927 transatlantic flight. André Citroën threw a reception for Lindbergh at the Quai de Javel factory, attended by 6,000 workers. And Citroën solicited endorsements from other celebrities of the day, such as the American singer Josephine Baker, who demonstrated her facility with the precursor of today's commercial jingles.
La belle voiture Citroën avec son confort, plaisir d'amour, tu appelles on oublie la Citroën dure toute la vie.
Citroën also took steps to ensure that the whole family knew his name, down to its youngest members. The result was a line of toy Citroën cars and the Citroënette, a children's pedal car model of the 5CV. The company even sponsored Citroënette races at seaside resorts, and later made an electrically powered version as well. By the mid-1920s, the Citroën company had begun to diversify its hold on the French automotive scene. It set up high-speed intercity bus routes and started its own taxi fleet. Along with Renault and Peugeot, Citroën was now one of the largest car makers in the country. But if André Citroën was to expand his company further, he knew that he'd have to take greater risks. André Citroën had a penchant for gambling. While his success in the casinos of Europe was only modest at best, the calculated risks he took at the helm of his firm had so far paid off. And in 1924, André Citroën began to take some bigger gambles with the fortunes of the company. The first was the introduction to Europe of the first all-steel car, the B10. Citroën had seen all-steel bodies being manufactured by the Budd Company of Philadelphia on one of his many trips to the US, and had borrowed heavily to make his own. Though the market for a mass-produced all-steel car was unproven, André Citroën adapted the B2 chassis and mechanics to carry the new pressed steel saloon body. But the B2 chassis was found to be too light for the heavier shell. In 1925, the B10 was replaced by the more robust B12. The gamble paid off. The all-steel line was a huge success, quickly emulated by Fiat, Morris Motors in England, and soon all the other mass-production car makers. In 1926, the B-line reached maturity with the introduction of the B14. It came standard with a larger 1.5-liter engine, a modern electrical system, and a slightly longer chassis permitting the addition of a small boot. The next year, the B14 got power-assisted four-wheel brakes and a new designation, the B14G. By this point, Citroën production was up to 400 cars a day, and the models were evolving at a furious pace. Only 2 years after it was introduced, the B14, though successful, was replaced by a whole new type.
This is a C4, originally known as the AC4 André Citroën 4 cylinders. It was built in 1928 and can be identified by its new radiator, its new bonnet, its new scuttle, and the improved streamlining of its wings.
The company later offered a light van version, the C4 Commercial, aimed at farmers and small businesses. Citroën also introduced his first six-cylinder car in 1928, the C6. Reminiscent of a big American car, the C6 had a 2.4-liter side valve engine, producing 45 horsepower and capable of 65 miles an hour. The company sold 11,000 of these before it offered an even bigger, better-equipped replacement, the C6F, the next year. By 1929, Citroën had become by far France's largest car maker, with 25% higher production than Renault, his closest competitor. And as the 1930s began, Citroën devoted progressively more time and money to technological innovation, much to the concern of the financiers who were funding it. André Citroën's belief in the sales power of advanced design was expressed in his motto, "As soon as an idea is good, the money is of no importance." It was a slogan guaranteed to unnerve money men, but it perfectly described Citroën's new car line of 1932. A good idea, costly to produce. The 8CV, 10CV, and 15CV collectively carried the nickname Rosalie. They incorporated another new construction idea from the American Budd Company, a unitary frame built without a chassis as foundation. Citroën proved the strength of the unibody construction to a doubtful French public by pushing a Rosalie off a cliff. Rolling one down a hill, and filling a bus with 22 passengers, then setting it on top of the car's roof. The Rosalies also featured an innovation first offered on the C4 and the C6G, rubberized engine mountings designed to reduce noise and vibration. The image of a gliding swan was adopted as the mascot for the technology, called moteur flottant, floating power. An 8CV with a special streamlined body beat the world's distance record by traveling the equivalent of 7 laps around the globe. Its nickname was Petite Rosalie.
I'm here to see just how far you can go on a gallon of petrol in this special edition Citroen AX, which gives me time to tell you about sunroof, sports seats, metallic paint, stereo radio cassette, and the free insurance. As for the fuel economy figures, I can't wait to find out.
The Citroen AX Elation, now at the very special on-the-road price of £6,532.
On the 15th of March 1933, André Citroën launched his Rosalie 4 operation. The little Rosalie covered 300,000 kilometers on the Montlhéry speed ring at an average speed of more than 93 kilometers per hour, beating 106 world records and 191 international records.
Up to this point, André Citroën had taken a series of calculated risks to advance automotive technology and expand his company. He borrowed money to present each new line, and he'd been able to pay it back only when each line succeeded. In 1934, only 2 years after Rosalie's introduction, Citroën decided essentially to replace it by blending all the technologies he'd pioneered and popularized with a few even more radical ideas.
He had borrowed some ideas from America, from Henry Ford, in terms of production quantities and simplicity, but he also had some very advanced ideas of his own, and his idea was to present in a single car a revolutionary step to the future. And he put all his money on the line and did just that.
André Citroën's revolutionary step was the introduction of a technology practically unknown at the time, front-wheel drive. Up to this point, virtually all cars were pushed along by the rear wheels. Though front-wheel drive offered considerable advantages of traction and stability, The technical obstacles had kept all but a very few car makers from attempting it. And of these, only the American Cord Company made more than a few hundred front-drive cars. Even so, Cords like this L29 suffered serious reliability problems, their constant velocity joints failing prematurely due to inadequate lubrication. It was not until 1966 that the Oldsmobile Toronado became the first front-wheel drive car to achieve success in the American marketplace. But in 1933, at least a quarter century ahead of his time, André Citroën wanted a car of completely new design, with no components carried over from earlier vehicles. A costly move that earned the antipathy of his head of design, Maurice Broglie. A talented young engineer named André Lefebvre was instead recruited to head up the project. Lefebvre came to Citroën from Renault, having started out in aviation, a background that would come into play as the car developed. Adding to the project's sizable cost was the necessary demolition and rebuilding of the Quai de Javel factory in just 6 months. The new car was introduced in 1934, descriptively named the Traction Avant, or front drive. The entire development of the Traction 7A had taken just over a year.
When it came out, it combined a number of features, any one of which would have been enough to identify it. Front-wheel drive, of course, torsion bar suspension, 4 independent wheels, 4-wheel hydraulic brakes, an engine with removable linings and push-rod-operated valves, and no running board.
The Traction was the first road car to include a torsion bar suspension, under license from the German auto engineer Ferdinand Porsche. Power-assisted brakes were likewise advanced and likewise licensed from the Lockheed Aircraft Company. None of these features were absolutely new in a production automobile, but it was the first time that they'd been offered together in a single car. Like the Rosalie, the Traction used welded unibody construction, the strength of which Citroën promoted by once again pushing the car off a cliff, and this time driving it away. The styling of the Traction, offered in both sedan and convertible versions, certainly was a giant step forward. Front drive and the absence of a drive shaft permitted designer Flaminio Bertoni to set the Traction quite low to the ground. The aeronautic orientation of Project Chief Lefebvre was evident in the unprecedented attention given to the car's aerodynamics. The Traction's sleek lines and distinctively sloping radiator grille made it look as if it were moving, even when it was standing still. However, because of the Traction Avant's radically shortened development cycle, not everything about the car worked perfectly. The constant velocity joints suffered the same sort of reliability problems that had plagued the Cord. They were replaced by more primitive but dependable universal joints mounted back-to-back. André Citroën had originally planned to include a kind of automatic transmission in the Traction. When the automatic proved unreliable, it was scrapped and replaced by a manual transmission. It was designed on a kitchen table in just 2 weeks.
He just seemed to be able to pick and choose of advanced features and then, amazingly, meld them into a package, because if his suspension had been wrong, if his transmission had been wrong, if his engine had been wrong, the car would have been wrong.
The Traction Avant was not wrong. Many in the press and public regarded it as sensational, an engineering masterpiece. This was the car on which André Citroën had bet his company, but it was a bet he was destined to lose. André Citroën had staked everything on the Traction Avant. When it was introduced in 1934, the Traction was the most technologically advanced production car in the world. Sadly, this wasn't enough to save the fortunes of André Citroën and his motor company. The expense of developing the Traction and rebuilding the Quai de Javel factory, along with André Citroën's growing casino debts and the global economic crash of the 1930s, combined to push the company to the brink of bankruptcy. The French government asked Citroen's principal creditor, Michelin Tires, to take control of the company. The price was the layoff of 8,000 workers and the removal of André Citroën as president of the firm bearing his name. In 1935, a claim for his traction avant was still ringing in the press, but the Depression had driven sales to their lowest ebb. And André Citroën died of cancer at the age of 57.
Just at the time when the traction avant was being recognized as the car that he predicted it would be, unfortunately his gambling caught up with him and he was out of the company and subsequently died, I guess, always with a broken heart in a situation like this. But he didn't get really to see the fruits of his entrepreneurial genius, and those fruits went on to the present day.
The company struggled on under new leadership, fine-tuning the traction avant line, introducing new variations. Early versions of the traction were considered somewhat underpowered, a shortcoming the company soon remedied by introducing the famed 15.6, 15 CV and 6 cylinders. Within a few years of André Citroën's death, sales began to climb. Soon the traction avant was the most popular production car of the day. But the new management was also looking forward to the company's next gamble. The idea came from the new managing director brought in by Michelin, a man named Pierre-Jules Boulanger. He wanted to motorize the whole country, especially the untapped rural market, potential customers who still relied on horse-drawn carts and carriages. Boulanger ordered Citroën engineers to design what he called an umbrella on 4 wheels.
It was a small car, very austere in appearance, very low-powered, geared well enough so that it could run well enough on the roads, and with room for 2 people and a load of potatoes, which is sort of an unusual demographic characteristic to look for.
The top-secret project received the code name TPV, or Très Petite Voiture, very small car. As with the traction, André Lefebvre headed the project after it had been refused by the chief designer Maurice Broglie. The 1937 prototype TPV had a front end that was corrugated to improve the strength of the light gauge aluminium, and only 1 headlamp, the legal minimum. The 2-cylinder engine could barely get the car up to 40 miles an hour, but it was extremely economical, more than 60 miles to the gallon. There were no frills. Even the windscreen wiper was manually operated. Boulanger also wanted the front-drive TPV to handle comfortably on rough country back roads, and included the specification that a basket of eggs set on the back seat should survive having the car driven across a plowed field with all the eggs unbroken. This the engineers accomplished by including a 4-wheel independent suspension, along with rack and pinion steering and power-assisted brakes. The car was finally ready for production in 1939, and 250 demonstration copies rolled off the line on September the 3rd. The next day, Hitler invaded Poland, and France was at war. World War II and the German occupation of France in 1940 gradually ground Citroën production to a halt. Company managers refused to collaborate with the Nazi conquerors, and by 1943, Citroën factories had been shut down completely. To prevent the TPV from falling into German hands, Pierre Boulanger ordered all but 1 of the prototypes destroyed. It wasn't until Germany was defeated and the war was over that Citroën restarted production and work began again in earnest on the TPV. Finally, in 1948, after 12 years of design and development, Citroën's very small car was ready to be introduced at the Paris Motor Show under its now official name, the 2 Chevaux, or 2CV.
À Paris, le 35e Salon de l'Automobile a été inauguré par Monsieur Vincent Auriol.
The 2CV, as introduced, was still true to the original design concept with just a few modifications. The corrugated aluminium had been replaced with easier-to-weld sheet steel. The original water-cooled two-cylinder engine had been replaced with an air-cooled design, which was easier to start in winter and cheaper too, if a bit noisy. The 2CV was stunningly inexpensive, at a contemporary price equivalent to £212, about a third the cost of a typical American car. Critical reaction was somewhat mixed. One American journalist asked if it came with a can opener. But the people of France immediately took to the odd little car, and thousands of orders were placed for the 2CV right there at the motor show. By 1950, the back order time ran to 6 years.
It was a tremendous success, and it did put the French farmer on wheels, and it did it economically, and it was a fine little car. And if you really think about it, it's really all anybody needs. I mean, we really don't need the Luxomobiles that we have. But for its time, it was exactly what everybody wanted.
Over the years, the 2CV became a part of the fabric of French life. The car became popular with the younger generation, and Citroën promoted it by staging races, round-the-world tours, rallies such as the Africa Raid. James Bond even drove one in For Your Eyes Only. In later years, Citroën would try to replace the 2CV with cars built on the same mechanics but with greater upmarket appeal. The Ami 6 would have swift, exaggerated lines emphasized by the inclined rear window. The Diane would fit into the product line between the 2CV and the Ami, and would last in production for 23 years. Citroën would also offer the Jeep-like Mehari, an all-terrain four-seat pickup with a ding-resistant plastic body. Each of these vehicles would have its day and its place in the market. But the little 2CV outlived them all. It would even experience a modest revival during the 1970s.
I did get the 2CV at the time at which there was the gas crisis, when there was long lines of people trying to obtain gasoline, and the 2CV was very good about this. It was easy to take it from place to place with very little fuel.
The 2CV lasted in production for more than 41 years. When the last rolled off the line in 1990, more than 3.8 million had been sold worldwide, a return on the company's wager greater than anyone could have imagined. Greater even than the tremendous success of the Traction Avant, which in 1954 was nearing the end of its life and preparing to be replaced by Citroën's most daring breakthrough yet.
You are looking at one of the best corner takers in the world. And of course, Ryan Giggs. The Citroen ZX with programmed rear wheel steering.
Two important things happened to the Traction 15.6 in the year 1954. For the first time, it was offered in a color other than black, and its name changed to 15.6H for hydropneumatic. The old car now had a new air and oil pressurized rear suspension system. But the changes were not intended to extend the Traction line. In fact, the last Traction Avant rolled off the Quai de Javel production line just 3 years later, after 23 years of manufacture and 760,000 sales. Rather, Citroën had given the 15.6 a hydropneumatic suspension as part of its larger plan to introduce the Traction's replacement, which would have hydropneumatic suspension on all four wheels. By the time the last Traction left the factory, that successor had been exciting controversy on the French automotive scene for 2 years. The DS19, once again masterminded by André Lefebvre, was radically different from every other car on the road in the mid-1950s, both in terms of the styling and the technology that it offered. For example, American cars of the day were giant rounded boxes with gaudy chrome, like this 55 Buick. The futuristic DS, on the other hand, was shaped for minimum aerodynamic drag, with the radiator below the midline of the gracefully curved bonnet. Inside, the dashboard was dominated by a unique single-spoke steering wheel.
The aesthetics of the DS model, and my first Citroen was a DS, was quite controversial, polarizing almost. That is, there were people who thought it was probably the ugliest car they'd ever seen. There were other people who thought it was a beautiful, streamlined object. And partly it's a matter of getting used to, and I think that what we've seen in the years since it was introduced is that more and more cars have come to look like the DS than otherwise.
The DS-19 was Citroen's rocket to the space age, fired 2 years before the launch of the Sputnik. In fact, the aesthetics of the car were so compelling and unusual that the DS shell was exhibited in museums. For those less excited about the looks of the DS, there were other attractions.
I have to admit that the DS, when it first came out, I thought it was hideous. But after driving it, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I was flabbergasted by what the car could do. And I forgot the looks.
What impressed engineers like Bill and John was the advanced performance the DS offered. The heart of the car's new technology was quite literally a pump, which powered the suspension, steering, semi-automatic transmission, and the first disc brakes ever fitted on a French production automobile. The self-leveling hydropneumatic suspension let the wheels track the road like the needle in a record groove. This gave the car impressive road handling and made the ride uniquely smooth and comfortable, both on the highway and on rough country roads. It even gave the DS a variable clearance, which the driver could change at the flip of a lever. The system worked by connecting each wheel to a piston. Each of the 4 pistons pressed on the liquid in a suspension sphere, which then compressed and decompressed a gas in the sphere. The pressure was shifted from sphere to sphere by a system of valves in order to keep the car level at all times.
The hydraulic pumps generates pressure, which is accumulated in this steel sphere and then distributed to the front suspension, which one element for this wheel is here, and this element for the opposite wheel is here, and we have 2 identical spheres for the rear axle as well.
The self-leveling ability even made it possible for the DS to operate with 1 wheel missing.
At Kyalami, S.A. Mirror takes a look at a ballet on 3 wheels, the wheel and turn of a Citroen cavalcade that spells out safety.
When traveling on all 4 wheels, the 1.9-liter engine adapted from the Traction Avant produced 70 brake horsepower and speeds of up to 85 miles an hour. Whatever anxiety Citroen managers might have felt about introducing yet another revolutionary and controversial car was immediately relieved. The DS-19 was an instant success. 750 of the sleek new cars were ordered in the first 45 minutes of its debut at the 1955 Paris Motor Show. 12,000 by the end of the first day. As the years went by, the DS gradually came to be identified with France in almost the same way as Camembert cheese and the Eiffel Tower. In the DS, pleasing form and aerodynamic function followed each other like yin and yang. For the first time, car design and a marketing campaign had been created together to attribute an image to the vehicle from the day the project was born. It became the car of French presidents like René Coty, who toured the countryside in DS-19 motorcades.
Précède l'imposant cortège du président de la République en visite officielle en Alsace.
In fact, a DS saved the life of President Charles de Gaulle during the 1962 assassination attempt by the ultranationalist Black Hand group. The assassins shot out 2 of the tires, but as this promotional film demonstrates, the DS was able to stop in complete control on only 2 wheels. And the hydro-pneumatic suspension even made it possible to change the blown tires quickly without resorting to a jack. Still, for all the advanced technology, for all the glamour and cachet the DS acquired, it was still a highly unusual and idiosyncratic car. By ignoring the fashions of the day and designing the best car they knew how to build, Citroen's engineers had created an automobile that symbolized Gallic independence.
I think it's fair to say that French car manufacturers have some of the characteristics of a French maitre d' in a very expensive restaurant. You are the customer, but they're not there necessarily to be pleased. You should be pleased just because you're there. That's sort of a Gallic indifference to the customer requirement. But there's a reverse psychology to it. If they thought the cars were that good, it seemed to make the customers think the cars were that good.
But of course, this perpetual drive towards advancing the state of the art meant that Citroën would soon have to improve on the DS19. The question was, how do you top your best? The DS line was a winner for France in more ways than one. Citroën introduced a less expensive version of the DS called the ID, with the hydraulic system confined to the suspension. When an ID19 won the Monte Carlo Rally in 1959, Citroën decided the time had come to re-enter the world of motorsports. In 1965, Citroën answered the complaint that the DS19 was underpowered by introducing the more powerful DS21. The 21 had an all-new 2.1-liter engine capable of taking the car up to 105 miles an hour, which gave it the winning edge in several Moroccan rallies. Also that year, the DS line would acquire a feature that would become one of its trademarks in the public mind. These distinctive, fared-in, swiveling headlamps. The headlights pivoted, partly to compensate for the car's ever-varying attitude due to the automated suspension. They were handy for traversing switchback curves, and their fairing behind glass gave the DS an even more shark-nosed appearance. In 1968, Citroën experienced a round of merger mania. The Italian Fiat company bought a 15% stake in Citroën, despite the protest of the French government, and Citroën bought a majority holding in the Maserati company. The Maserati merger gave Citroën the expertise it needed to complete yet another ambitious and risky venture, the development of a luxury coupe. Within 2 years, the SM was ready for introduction. It was a car of which André Citroën would certainly have approved. The SM was the fastest Citroën ever built, with a 2.7-liter Maserati V6 engine capable of speeds up to 142 miles an hour.
The SM is very much like the DS in that it has a very similar suspension. A lot of the engineering principles are very much the same, very aerodynamic. The principal difference is in the engine, which in the DS is a little bit underpowered. This one, on the other hand, has 3/4 of a Maserati V8 under the hood and is very responsive to the throttle. That just makes it more fun to drive.
Besides its powerful engine, the SM also offered unusual self-centering power steering, along with Citroën's very first 5-speed transmission, and from 1972, electronic fuel injection. A winning competitor from its very first year, the SM represented the apex of Citroën engineering.
The technology they have been using is by concept 50 years old and only now showing up in what we consider domestic vehicles today. The technology is an engineer's dream. Even aircraft don't have quality like this. They left the original extra quality without attempting to cut down on the cost. This is why I feel that when you produce a machine with this quality, it is a prototype. It is not a mass-produced machine.
Indeed, the SM was also the most expensive Citroën ever built, priced at £5,500, in an era when a Cadillac Coupe de Ville cost £4,700. When the gas crisis of the early 70s completely changed the sales environment, the days of the fuel-guzzling SM were numbered. In 1973, Fiat sold its stake in Citroën, and 2 years later, Citroën sold Maserati, marking the end of the line for the SM. Only 13,000 were ever built. 1975 also brought the close of the whole DS line, after 20 years and 1.5 million cars sold. Since then, the company has been acquired by Peugeot, which has had a steadying influence on Citroën's management and fortunes. Citroën has had continuing success over the years, introducing its new lines throughout the world, except in the American marketplace, which they've largely avoided. Those winning lines include the CX, which replaced the DS series, the GS, the AX, the XM, and now the Xantia, among others. They've done well for the company. Their continuing success has, in a sense, vindicated André Citroën's audacious design philosophy.
It certainly was distressing to his company, perhaps to his shareholders, to see so much put on the line. But I think it goes back to who did he pick to carry out his ideas? Who did he pick to execute his ideas? And so maybe it wasn't such a great gamble. If you went to the casinos and knew the croupier was going to be very friendly to you, it's not as much of a gamble there. And in this case, for Citroën, the croupiers were his engineers who did well. I think that instills an ethic in a company, and so probably long after he was gone, the engineers and their disciples who were there continued in the same vein.
André Citroën's chancy approach to car making may not always have been understood or appreciated in its day. But the proof that it was basically sound is that 60-odd years later, John and Bill and millions of other Citroën owners are still enjoying the fruits of André Citroën's daring imagination.
Morgen om 11 uur Classic Wheels met de Avanti. De auto die 30 jaar na het failliet gaan nog steeds door liefhebbers gekoesterd wordt. Dadelijk een tocht met Steven Pern. 2500 kilometer over de lengteas van Japan in Compass.